Weekend Modder here with a send-in proof video for Dustin N. I'm not entirely sure that this will end up being a full proof video, but I wanted to kind of explain, and doing this in video was going to be easier than typing the whole thing up. So I RGH'd this console last night. It is a 16 megabyte Corona console, so we don't use the 4 gig tool at all. We use the regular NANDEX to solder the points, read off the NAND, write the ECC, booted Zell, no problem. A little bit of background for anybody else who isn't the owner of this console is he mentions in his send-in form he gets a ventilation error when he turns on the console. But it says after a couple minutes it runs just fine with no problems. So I discovered in taking it apart what was causing that is, so if you actually look here, and I can kind of demonstrate, there is actually a little aluminum post that goes through this through hole in the motherboard and is embedded into the heatsink. And then that's actually what the X clamp on the underside of the motherboard is clipped into. So one of these, actually this far back corner over here, that little post was backed off about a dozen turns or so, which resulted in almost a full centimeter or so of that corner being raised up. So the whole heatsink was like cockeyed this direction. It was lifted towards that corner, which means, of course, that the XC GPU under here was not making consistent contact with the heatsink. So you had dust bunnies and super dried out thermal paste. So during the process of RGHing it, I cleaned off all the old thermal paste, slapped some new thermal paste on there, tightened down that, I don't know what you exactly call it, the little anchor that goes into the heatsink so that it was flush, and then reinstalled everything. The good news is that the console booted Zell just fine. I got your CPU key. I was able to create an XC build image. But then when I went to perform a standard boot into the normal XC build dashboard, the console would throw an E75 error message. And if you do any amount of Google searching or whatever, E75 is basically like hardware failure as a result of overheating, that sort of thing. Also, the fan really basically just wasn't even spinning. I tried removing the PWM control, which is like the fan speed control, which generally then will make them run full-blown at 12 volt. Unfortunately, it didn't even spin then. So leaving it sit completely overnight, my thought was that it would totally cool, and then hopefully this morning it will boot up into a regular dashboard. I have not booted it yet today. Doing that for the first time right now here on video, so that in case it boots and then warms up and then stops booting, that you kind of have proof, that I'm capturing it right now. So it's very likely that the fan may need replacing. It's also very possible that you may actually need to have the XC GPU under here reflowed or like reballed in order to get this thing functioning normally. Although last night it did actually boot Zell without problem every time. So that's also another indicator of a GPU related issue. Zell puts a lot less stress on a GPU than running the full-blown dashboard. And again, if you do a little bit of searching, you'll find a lot of forums that reinforce that notion of if you can boot Zell but you can't boot regular dash, you may have a bad GPU. And one of the ways that they test that is like loading a graphically intensive thing through Zell. So like there's an N64 emulator that you can load through Zell. There's an XM player app, which is like a media player app that you can load through Zell. So if we can't get Dash to boot, I will load up one of those and try to get it to launch via Zell and use that as an additional confirmation test. But that's kind of where we're at with it. So I did go ahead and already plug in HDMI. I've got power right here, so I'm plugging that in. You can see the light on the chip comes on. I've got the faceplate rigged up so I can just use the regular buttons here. So I'm just going to turn it on. So you can see the green pulsing light indicates the glitch cycle. But as you can see here, no fan spin unless I do it manually, even though the fan cable is totally connected, normal, no problem. Let's see if the angle will be a little better like this, maybe. So we're getting glitch cycles. I can hear it doing the reset normally. That's normal here. Okay, there we just got E75. So there's the error. Unfortunately, still after sitting cold overnight here. I'm going to power it back off real fast, and I'm going to boot it with the eject button this time to demonstrate that it boots Zell just fine. Or, again, like I said, it did last night. So turning it on with the eject button, which will trigger Zell. So there's your boot indicator, and then Xbox screen, Zell boots up just fine. So unfortunately, the long and short of it looks like is we're confirming that you have an XC GPU issue. You're going to need the thing reballed or reflowed in order to get it working right here. That's not something that I have the equipment or the desire to do. I started to kind of get into that once. I'm cutting it off here because I don't want to continue to run it for so long without a fan spinning. The heatsink's already a little bit noticeably warmer than it was. It's not terribly warm, but yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, the RGH thing that I do is totally fine here. It's very likely that the cockeyed situation that you had going on with the heatsink applied some weird pressure to the XC GPU, and then when I fixed it and applied full normal pressure back to it, the solder balls may have that are underneath joining the XC GPU to the motherboard. There's actually just a layer of solder balls. It's not socketed or anything. Are evidently damaged or disconnected or doing whatever there. So I definitely think a reflow is in order here. Perhaps a reball. So we can continue. We can have a conversation about what you want to do, but really there's not much else I can offer you on this particular console. I could revert it to retail, I guess, but I feel pretty strongly that if I do that, it's going to continue to throw that E75 error. Perhaps that's a test worth doing, but we'll keep chatting. And anyway, I wanted you to see firsthand what's going on with it, and yeah, so there it is.